Welcome to our corner of stories, where every silence has a voice and every heartbreak has a name. Tonight's tale is not just fiction, it's a reflection of mothers who gave their all, of families built on love and shaken by betrayal, of quiet women who waited until they didn't, of housewives turned warriors when love turned its back. This is a story of betrayal, of a mother's pain and the strength it takes to stand again. So make yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and let the story unfold. Because sometimes the ones we love the most leave the deepest scars. The moment you realize your children don't want you in their lives is like having the air violently ripped from your lungs. One second you're breathing, the next you're drowning in plain sight. I know this because I lived it. But before that moment, before the cold December wind on a Boston doorstep, before the words that would echo in my mind for months, there was a lifetime of love and sacrifice. There was me, Ruth, a mother who would move mountains for her children. 19 years ago, my husband died unexpectedly, leaving me with two teenagers and a mortgage I could barely afford. Mark was 15, Sophie 13. They needed stability. They needed a mother who could be both parents. So I became that person. I sold our family home in Connecticut, downsized to a modest two-bedroom apartment, and picked up night shifts at the local hospital where I worked as a nurse. I cut my own hair, learned to fix the plumbing myself, and drove the same car for 12 years because every spare penny went toward their futures. I wanted them to have the opportunities their father and I had dreamed of giving them, and they did well. Mark graduated from NYU with a business degree, married his college sweetheart, Elaine, and landed a job with a financial firm in Boston. Sophie followed suit, graduating from UConn before moving to Chicago for a position in marketing. I was proud, so proud, that I didn't mind that they rarely called, that my birthdays often went unacknowledged, that invitations to visit were few and far between. They're busy building their lives. I would tell my sister Diane when she questioned their absence. That's what we raised them to do. But at 58, after 33 years of motherhood, I was tired. Tired of being an afterthought. Tired of the obligation in their voices when they did call. Tired of sending checks every month to help with their mortgages, car payments, daycare costs. Money I could have been putting toward my own retirement money that was never acknowledged except with a quick text. Got it. Thanks. Still, I persisted, because that's what mothers do. Right? We give and give until there's nothing left. This past December, I made a decision. I was going to spend Christmas with my grandchildren. Mark and Elaine had two beautiful children, Emma, 6, and Noah, 4, whom I'd only seen a handful of times. Sophie was expecting her first child in March. I wanted to be part of their lives, not just a signature on a card or a voice on the phone. I called Mark in early December, my heart racing as I rehearsed what to say. "Mom," he answered, sounding distracted. I could hear the din of his office in the background. "Hi, sweetheart. I won't keep you. I just wanted to know if I could come for Christmas this year. I'd love to see the kids open their presents." There was a pause, followed by the sound of a door closing. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Christmas? I don't know. Mom, Elaine's parents are coming and we don't have a lot of space. I could stay at a hotel." I offered quickly. "I wouldn't be in the way." Another pause. "Let me talk to Elaine and get back to you." He never did. After a week of silence, I called again. This time, it went to voicemail. I left a message, my voice carefully steady. "Mark, it's Mom. I was just wondering if you'd had a chance to talk to Elaine about Christmas. I found a reasonable hotel nearby. Call me back when you can." 3 days later, I received a text. "Christmas is fine. Dinner at 3. No hotel needed. You can have the guest room." I was elated. I booked my flight immediately, spent hours selecting gifts for the children, and even splurged on a new dress. Emerald green with a modest neckline that complemented my silver hair. I wanted to look nice for the family photos. The flight to Boston on Christmas Eve was turbulent, but my spirits were high. I took a taxi from the airport to the address Mark had provided, a beautiful colonial in an upscale suburb. The neighborhood was picture perfect with snow-dusted lawns and twinkling lights adorning the houses. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. My son had done well for himself. I arrived just after 2 in the afternoon, pulling my suitcase behind me as I navigated the freshly shoveled walkway. I could see movement behind the frosted glass of the front door. My heart quickened as I rang the bell, smoothing down my coat with nervous hands. The door swung open, and there stood Mark, his expression flickering from surprise to something I couldn't quite name. He was taller than I remembered, his dark hair now peppered with gray at the temples. He looked so much like his father that my breath caught. "Mom," he said, the word flat. "You're early." I smiled, ignoring the lack of warmth in his greeting. The flight got in ahead of schedule. I couldn't wait to see everyone. He didn't move to let me in. Behind him, I could hear the sound of laughter and Christmas music. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow," he said, shifting his weight to block the doorway more effectively. I frowned, confusion settling over me like a cold mist. "Your text said dinner at 3. Today is Christmas. Christmas dinner is tomorrow," he corrected, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "Today is Christmas Eve." I pulled out my phone, hands trembling slightly as I navigated to his text. "See, right here. Christmas is fine. Dinner at 3. He barely glanced at the screen. "That's not what I meant. Look, Mom, today is just family. Elaine's parents are here and we're doing our own thing. Tomorrow is when we do the big dinner with extended family." Extended family. The words stung more than they should have. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "That's fine. I can come back tomorrow. Maybe you could point me to my hotel, the one you said I didn't need to book because I could stay in the guest room." A flash of something guilt, perhaps, crossed his face. "The guest room isn't ready. We thought you were coming tomorrow." I stood there, suitcase in hand, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "So, where am I supposed to stay tonight?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "There's a Holiday Inn about 15 minutes from here. I can call and see if they have a room available." Behind him, a small voice called out, "Daddy, who's at the door?" Mark turned, his body language shifting. "Nobody, sweetheart. Go back to Grandma and Grandpa. Nobody." That's what I was to my own son. Nobody. I took a step back. Dignity the only thing keeping me upright. "Don't bother with the hotel. I'll figure it out." "Mom," he started, but I cut him off. "Merry Christmas. Mark, give the children my love." I turned and walked away, my suitcase feeling heavier with each step. I didn't look back, even when I heard the door close behind me. I made it to the end of the block before the tears came, hot and furious against my cold cheeks. It was there, sitting on a bench at a bus stop, that I decided I wouldn't go to a hotel. I would come back tomorrow as planned. Perhaps there had been a genuine misunderstanding. Perhaps tomorrow would be different. It wasn't. When I returned the next day at precisely 2:45 p.m., dressed in my new emerald dress with arms full of gifts, Mark opened the door and uttered those unforgivable words. "Sorry, I think you're at the wrong house." For a moment, I thought he was joking, some cruel prank that would end with laughter and apologies. But his eyes were cold, unfamiliar. Behind him, I could see a Christmas tree surrounded by presents, a table set for dinner, and the back of Elaine's head as she arranged something on the sideboard. "Mark," I said, my voice barely audible. "It's me. It's Mom." He didn't flinch. "I think you have the wrong address. There's no Mark here." And then he closed the door. I stood there frozen as the world tilted on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not after everything. I was halfway down the walkway when my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I answered, hope fluttering in my chest. Mom. His voice was different now, casual, almost amused. Sorry about that. Elaine's parents are super traditional and they don't know about, you know, the financial arrangement we have. We're trying to keep things peaceful. Financial arrangement, I repeated, the words foreign on my tongue. Yeah, the monthly support. Look, why don't you head back to your hotel? I'll call you tomorrow when things calm down. I don't have a hotel, Mark. I came here to spend Christmas with my family. He sighed, the sound grating against my ear. Mom, I can't do this right now. Just give us some space. Okay, we'll figure it out later. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice breaking. What did I do? Nothing. It's not, look, I've got to go. Dinner's almost ready. Mark, relax, Mom. We just want some peace. I took a deep breath, my entire body shaking. I understand. I was about to hang up when I heard it. Mark's voice, slightly muffled, as if he'd pulled the phone away from his face, but hadn't yet disconnected. She thinks that money she sends every month buys her a seat at the table. The phone slipped from my hand, landing with a soft thud in the snow at my feet. I stared at it for a long moment before slowly bending to retrieve it. The call was still active. I ended it with a trembling finger. She thinks that money she sends every month buys her a seat at the table. The words echoed in my head as I made my way back to the main road, dragging my suitcase through the snow. They echoed as I hailed a taxi. They echoed as I checked into the Holiday Inn and sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching my purse with white-knuckled hands. And they were still echoing late that night when I opened my banking app, and with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Canceled the automatic transfers to both my children's accounts. I slept surprisingly well that night. No tears, no second guessing, just the heavy, dreamless sleep of someone who has finally put down an unbearable burden. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the Holiday Inn, painting the walls in pale gold. Ruth lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind strangely calm after the storm of the previous day. The silence in her room was absolute. No children's laughter, no footsteps in the hall, no phone ringing with requests or reminders, just the steady hum of the heater and her own measured breathing. She sat up, feeling the unfamiliar lightness in her chest. The decision she'd made last night canceling the automatic transfers. Drawing a line still felt surreal, but also liberating. For the first time in decades, she wasn't dreading the day ahead. She was simply curious. Ruth reached for her phone, half expecting to see nothing. Instead, the screen lit up with a barrage of missed calls and frantic messages. 25 missed calls, 15 from Mark, 10 from Sophie, dozens of texts, each more urgent than the last. Mom, the transfer didn't go through. Is everything okay? I need that money for Noah's daycare payment. Please call ASAP. What the hell? Mom, I'm about to be late on my mortgage. Call me now. Ruth scrolled through the messages with a strange detachment, as if reading someone else's mail. She set the phone aside, silenced it, and went to take a long, hot shower. As the water cascaded over her, Ruth thought about her life. She remembered the years she'd spent worrying, sacrificing, always putting her children's needs first. She remembered the loneliness of empty holidays, the sting of being forgotten, the weight of being needed only for what she could provide. She remembered the look on Mark's face at the door, the words that had cut deeper than any argument. She stepped out of the shower, wrapped herself in a towel, and looked in the mirror. The woman who stared back at her looked older, yes, but also lighter. The lines around her eyes seemed softer, her posture straighter. She dressed carefully, applied a touch of makeup, and smoothed her silver hair. At the front desk, Ruth extended her stay for 3 more days. She needed time to think, to plan. She walked to a nearby cafe, ordered a cappuccino and a croissant, and pulled out her tablet. For years, she dreamed of traveling, seeing the world, volunteering, living for herself, but had always found reasons not to. The children might need her. The money could help them instead. It wasn't safe. It wasn't practical. Now, with a sense of clarity, she booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok, departing in 2 days. Thailand had always fascinated her, the temples, the food, the vibrant life. The thought sent a thrill through her, a feeling she barely recognized as excitement. Her phone vibrated again. Sophie, this time. Ruth hesitated, then answered. Hello, Sophie. Mom. Finally. What's going on with the transfers? Mark said his didn't go through either. No greeting. No, how are you? Just straight to the point. I've decided to discontinue the monthly transfers. Ruth said, her voice calm. There was a beat of silence, then a sputtering noise. You can't do that. I'm counting on that money for the baby's nursery. I'm sorry to hear that. I suggest you and Daniel adjust your budget accordingly. This is about Mark, isn't it? He told me what happened. It was a misunderstanding. Mom, you're being ridiculous. It's not about Mark, Ruth replied, though she knew it was only partly true. It's about me finally recognizing my worth. Sophie laughed. A harsh sound. Your worth, Mom. You're almost 60. This isn't the time to find yourself or whatever midlife crisis you're having. I'm 58. Sophie, not dead. And I've put my life on hold long enough. So that's it. You're just cutting us off without warning because your feelings got hurt. Real mature. Mom? Ruth closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. I've given you both over $1,000 each month for years. That's more than enough time to become financially independent. We are independent, Sophie snapped. But things are tight right now with the baby coming and Daniel's commission-based job. Then perhaps it's time to make some difficult choices, like I did when your father died. Downsize, take on extra work, clip coupons. I can't believe you're doing this, Sophie said, her voice trembling with anger. After everything we've been through as a family, that's just it. Sophie, we haven't been a family in a very long time. I'm simply acknowledging the reality of our relationship. There was a pause. When Sophie spoke again, her voice was softer, cajoling. Mom, please, I know Mark was a jerk at Christmas, but don't punish me for his mistake. I need you. The baby needs you. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. 5 minutes ago, she was having a midlife crisis. Now she was needed. I'm not punishing anyone. Sophie, I'm choosing myself for once. I've already booked a flight to Thailand. I'm going to travel, see the world, maybe volunteer. Thailand, Sophie echoed incredulously. Are you insane? What about when the baby comes? You're just going to miss the birth of your first grandchild. I'll send gifts, Ruth said mildly, just as you send birthday cards when you remember. There was a long silence, then a voice filled with venom. You're selfish. Dad would be so ashamed of you. The line went dead. Ruth stared at the phone, waiting for the pain, the guilt, the overwhelming need to call her daughter back and apologize. It didn't come. Instead, she felt oddly peaceful, as if the last tether binding her to her old life had been severed. She spent the rest of the day preparing for her journey. She called her landlord to give notice on her apartment, arranged for Diane to pack up her belongings and either store or donate them, and contacted her supervisor at the hospital to tender her resignation. 32 years of service ended with a brief phone call and a promise to email her formal letter. By evening, her phone had fallen silent. No more calls from either of her children. Perhaps they were commiserating together, painting her as the villain in their story. The thought didn't bother her as much as it once would have. She ordered room service for dinner and opened her laptop to research accommodations in Bangkok. As she scrolled through photos of golden temples and bustling markets, she felt a lightness in her chest, a sensation so foreign it took her a moment to recognize it as freedom. That night, Ruth slept deeply and dreamlessly, the first true rest she'd had in years. Ruth's flight to Bangkok was long, but for the first time in years, she felt no anxiety about what waited for her on the other side. She was not running away. She was stepping toward something new. As the plane soared above the clouds, she gazed out the window and let her mind drift. There was sadness, yes, but also a growing sense of anticipation. She was finally living for herself. Bangkok greeted her with a rush of humid air and the chaotic melody of the city tuk-tuks weaving through traffic. Vendors calling out in Thai, the scent of lemongrass and grilled meat everywhere. Umbi. Ruth checked into a small hotel in Sukhumvit, her suitcase lighter than it had ever been, her heart lighter still. The first days passed in a haze of discovery. She wandered through the grand palace, marveled at the golden spires, and let the calm of Buddhist temples soothe her. She ate pad thai from street stalls, took a cooking class, and learned to barter at the market. Each night, she wrote in her journal not about Mark or Sophie, not about pain or regret, but about the colors and sounds and tastes of her new world. But even as she embraced her freedom, the past was never far behind. On her fifth night in Bangkok, Ruth received an email from Sophie. The subject line was blunt. "We need to talk. Mom, it's been nearly 2 weeks since you left. Mark told me about your conversation at the hotel. I think you're being incredibly selfish and short-sighted, but that's apparently nothing new. What is new is that my doctor is concerned about my blood pressure. The stress of your little disappearing act has put my pregnancy at risk. Daniel and I are faced with the very real possibility of complications, and the financial strain isn't helping. We're about to miss a mortgage payment, and Daniel's commission checks have been smaller than expected this quarter. I don't know what kind of point you're trying to prove, but I hope it's worth potentially harming your grandchild. If something happens to this baby because of the stress you've caused, I will never forgive you. Never. We need the support you promised us. We've built our lives around it. You can't just change the rules without warning. If you have any love left for this family, you'll reconsider this selfish decision and come home." Sophie, Ruth read the email twice, her hands trembling not with guilt, but with a strange, quiet resolve. The words were familiar accusation, guilt, manipulation. She had seen it all before, in different forms, for years. She took a deep breath and replied, "Sophie, I'm sorry to hear about your blood pressure concerns. Pregnancy can be stressful under the best circumstances, and I hope you're following your doctor's recommendations for managing your condition. As for the financial situation, I've been clear about my position. The monthly transfers will not resume. This isn't a negotiation or a temporary measure to teach you a lesson. It's a permanent change in our relationship. You mentioned support I promised you. I don't recall ever promising lifetime financial support to two adults with advanced degrees and professional careers. What I did promise was to love you and prepare you for independent adulthood. I fulfilled both obligations. I hope you find a way to manage your finances that doesn't involve my checkbook. Perhaps this is an opportunity to reassess your priorities and make some difficult but necessary choices. Take care of yourself and the baby. Mom, she hit send before she could second guess herself, then turned off her phone. That afternoon, she wandered through a quiet temple, letting the hush and the scent of incense calm her. She watched monks sweep the courtyard and felt, for the first time, a sense of peace that did not depend on anyone else's approval. 3 days later, Ruth booked a ticket to Hanoi. She had planned to stay in Bangkok for a month, but Sophie's email had tainted the city. She needed a fresh start. Again. When she finally turned her phone back on, there were no new messages from Sophie, but there was a voicemail from Mark. His voice was tight, angry. Mom, I don't know what you said to Sophie, but she's been admitted to the hospital with pregnancy complications. Her doctor is talking about possible bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy, which means she'll have to take unpaid leave from work. Daniel can't cover their expenses alone. This isn't a game anymore. This is your grandchild's health we're talking about. Call me back. Ruth sat on the edge of her bed, the old guilt threatening to return. But she remembered Sophie's history, how she'd faked illnesses to avoid responsibility, how she'd used distress as a tool. Ruth called Mark back. He answered curtly. How is Sophie? Ruth asked, keeping her tone neutral, stable. They're monitoring her and the baby. Her blood pressure spiked after your email. I see. And what exactly did my email say that was so shocking? He paused. I don't know. She was too upset to show me. Something about cutting her off permanently. I simply reaffirmed what I'd already told you. Both that the financial support has ended. Nothing new, nothing surprising. Well, whatever you said, it landed her in the hospital. Are you happy now? No, Mark, I'm not happy that Sophie is in the hospital, but I'm also not responsible for her medical condition. Pregnant women have high blood pressure for many reasons. You're unbelievable, he muttered. Your daughter is in the hospital, possibly facing a high-risk pregnancy, and you're in Thailand playing tourist and making excuses. I'm not making excuses. I'm stating facts. But since you brought it up, yes, I am in Thailand living my life, finally, after decades of putting everyone else first. At what cost? Mom, your family, your grandchildren. My family exists whether I finance them or not. And my grandchildren will know me as a person, not a checkbook, or they won't know me at all. That's up to you and Sophie now. There was a long silence. Then, in a voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it, I need $10,000. The baldness of the request startled a laugh out of Ruth. Excuse me, for Sophie's medical bills, to cover her leave from work, to keep them from losing their house. $10,000 alone, if that makes you feel better. You can have it back when, no, Ruth interrupted. Not $10,000, not $10. I'm not sending any money. Mark? Then you're condemning your daughter and grandchild to financial ruin, he said bitterly. I hope your temples and elephant rides are worth it. The line went dead. Ruth sat for a long time, the phone still in her hand. The old guilt tugged at her, but a new voice, stronger now, reminded her that she had helped for years, had sacrificed her own security, her own dreams. Where had it gotten her, standing on a doorstep on Christmas Day, being told she was at the wrong house? No, she was done. She set the phone down and walked out onto her balcony. The sun was setting over Bangkok, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow, she would visit the floating markets. The day after, perhaps the ancient city of Ayutthaya. In 3 days, she would board a plane to Vietnam, leaving this chapter behind. Whatever happened with Sophie and her pregnancy, whatever financial hardships her children faced, those were their stories now, not hers. For the first time in decades, Ruth was writing her own story, and it would not be a tragedy. 6 months passed in a kaleidoscope of new experiences. Ruth's journey, once defined by obligation and sacrifice, was now shaped by discovery and quiet joy. Vietnam led her to Cambodia, where she watched the sunrise over Angkor Wat, and then to Laos, Malaysia, and finally Bali, where she celebrated her 59th birthday on a beach, surrounded by new friends and laughter. Each country offered its own lessons in letting go, in embracing the present, in trusting herself. She volunteered at a medical clinic in a remote Thai village, her nursing skills bridging language and cultural gaps. She learned to scuba dive off the coast of Malaysia, discovering a silent world of color and movement beneath the surface. Through it all, Ruth kept in touch with Diane, her sister, who respected her wishes not to discuss Mark or Sophie unless absolutely necessary. From Diane's brief updates, Ruth learned that Sophie had delivered a healthy baby girl named Lily after a complicated pregnancy. There had been no birth announcement, no photos, no invitation to meet her granddaughter. The knowledge sat like a small stone in Ruth's heart, not heavy enough to weigh her down, but present nonetheless. One humid evening in Chiang Mai, as Ruth wandered through a bustling night market, her phone buzzed with an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "From Daniel, Sophie's husband." She found a quiet corner, away from the swirl of lights and music, and opened the message. "Ruth, I'm writing without Sophie's knowledge. She would be furious if she knew, but I feel you deserve to know what's happening. Things have been difficult since you left. Sophie had a complicated pregnancy and delivery, as you may have heard. Lily is healthy, but Sophie has struggled with postpartum depression on top of the financial stress. We've had to make significant changes. We sold our house and moved to a smaller apartment. Sophie returned to work earlier than planned, and I've taken on consulting work in addition to my regular job. Mark and Elaine have also had to make adjustments. Emma is now in public school, and Mark took a second job. I'm not writing to make you feel guilty, but so you understand the reality we've been living. Sophie recently received a job offer in Connecticut, a significant promotion, but we need temporary housing while we look for a place of our own. Diane mentioned your apartment is empty, but paid for. Sophie is too proud to ask, so I'm asking for her, for us, for Lily. I know we have no right to ask anything of you. I know my wife and her brother treated you inexcusably. I won't make excuses for them or for myself. If you choose not to respond, I understand. I just wanted you to know that, despite everything, your family misses you, not your money. You? Daniel Ruth read the email twice, her emotions swirling relief, sadness, suspicion, hope. It was the first honest communication she'd received from any of them. No manipulation, no demands, just a straightforward request and an acknowledgement of past wrongs. She allowed herself to imagine saying yes, offering them the apartment, returning to Connecticut, meeting her granddaughter, attempting to rebuild some semblance of family. The path back to her old life stretched before her, familiar and safe. But then she remembered Christmas Day, the casual cruelty, the years of being taken for granted, the frantic calls that came only when the money stopped. Not your money, you, a beautiful sentiment. But was it true? Or was this simply a more sophisticated form of manipulation? She closed the email and rejoined the vibrant chaos of the night market, letting the question linger. The next morning, Ruth sat on her guest house balcony, watching the city come alive. She composed her response with care, Daniel. Thank you for your honesty and for acknowledging the past. I'm sorry to hear about Sophie's struggles and the challenges you've all faced. These are hard lessons, but necessary ones. Regarding the apartment, it's paid through the end of August, after which Diane will handle the final closing. You and Sophie are welcome to use it until then, with the understanding that this is a temporary arrangement and not a resumption of financial support. Diane has a key and can make the necessary arrangements. Please understand that this gesture does not erase the past or change my decision to live my own life. I won't be returning to Connecticut in the foreseeable future. My journey has become more than a reaction to Christmas Day. It's a reclaiming of myself after decades of putting everyone else first. As for meeting Lily, perhaps someday, but not now, not like this. When and if we reconnect, it needs to be based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not necessity or convenience. I wish you, Sophie and Lily, well. Ruth. She hit send, then closed her laptop and went to pack. Her flight to Japan left that afternoon the next leg of a journey with no fixed destination or end date. 3 days later, Daniel replied briefly, thanking her for the apartment and attaching a photo of Lily. The baby was beautiful, with Sophie's delicate features and a shock of dark hair that reminded Ruth of her late husband. She saved the photo but didn't respond. That night, Ruth called Diane. "They're really struggling, aren't they?" she asked after exchanging pleasantries. "Yes," Diane replied simply. "But they're figuring it out. Sophie's job offer is legitimate. Mark's taken a financial planning course, if you can believe it. Apparently, he's become quite the budgeting expert." Ruth laughed softly. "Better late than never, I suppose." "Are you having second thoughts?" Diane asked carefully. "About the money, no. About cutting them off completely. Sometimes, I look at Lily's photo and wonder if I'm punishing an innocent child for her parents' mistakes. You're not punishing anyone. Ruth, you're living your life. There's a difference, is there? Sometimes it feels like a very fine line. The difference is intent. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left to save yourself." Ruth considered this as she watched the Tokyo skyline glitter outside her window. "I offered them the apartment. I know. Daniel called me. He was grateful, though Sophie hasn't said a word about it. She wouldn't. Pride runs deep in this family. Wonder where she gets that from," Diane teased, after they hung up. Ruth sat for a long time, thinking about family, about choices, about the ripple effects of a single moment on a snowy doorstep. Had she done the right thing by most traditional standards? Probably not. A good mother would have forgiven, would have returned, would have continued to sacrifice, but those standards had nearly destroyed her, had enabled behaviors that diminished them all. In the end, the question wasn't whether she'd done the right thing, but whether she could live with the choice she'd made. And the answer, increasingly, was yes. 1 year to the day after that fateful Christmas, Ruth found herself on a beach in New Zealand, watching the sunrise on what would be a warm summer day. Her phone buzzed with a text from an international number. It was Sophie. "Lily took her first steps yesterday. I recorded it. Thought you might want to see. No pressure to respond." Attached was a video of a beautiful dark-haired toddler wobbling across a living room floor, arms outstretched toward the camera, face alight with triumph and joy. It was the first direct communication from Sophie in a year. No demands, no accusations. No guilt trips, just a grandmother's moment, freely shared. Ruth saved the video, but didn't respond immediately. Later that day, she sent a simple reply. "Thank you for sharing this. She's beautiful." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something a small crack in the wall between them, allowing in just enough light to see that there might be a path forward someday. Not back to what they were, that relationship was gone forever, but perhaps toward something new, something with boundaries, something based on choice rather than obligation. As the sun climbed higher over the Pacific, Ruth walked along the shoreline, feet sinking into warm sand. Ahead of her stretched miles of untraveled beach. Behind her, a set of footprints already being erased by the tide. She had no idea where this path would lead, but for the first time in her life, that uncertainty didn't frighten her. It excited her because it was her path, her choice, her life, and no one, not even her children, would ever take that from her again. Ruth woke to the gentle sound of waves outside her window, the air in New Zealand crisp and cool. It had been a year since that Christmas, since the day her son closed the door in her face, since she'd chosen herself over obligation. In that year, she had learned to live with both the ache of loss and the thrill of freedom. She had learned to let the past be the past, and to let hope be something small and quiet, not a desperate wish. She made her coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the Pacific. Her phone was silent, as it had been for most of the year, except for the rare, tentative messages from Sophie, a photo of Lily's first steps, a short video of her babbling, a simple thinking of you on Mother's Day. Each message was a tiny olive branch, and Ruth accepted them for what they were: small gestures. Not yet reconciliation, but not resentment either. She had learned, as so many estranged parents do, that healing was not a single dramatic moment, but a series of small, sometimes imperceptible steps. There were days when she missed her children with a physical ache, when she wondered if she'd made the right choice, when she replayed old memories like a favorite song. But there were also days, more and more of them, when she felt whole, at peace with herself and her decisions. That morning, as she watched the tide erase footprints from the sand, her phone buzzed again. It was Diane. "Morning, world traveler. Are you still in paradise, I am?" Ruth replied, sending a photo of the sunrise. "How's Connecticut? Gray and rainy as always. But I have news. Sophie called. She and Daniel are moving into your old apartment next week. She wanted to know if you'd be willing to video chat with Lily. No pressure," she said. "Only if you want to." Ruth's heart skipped. She thought of Lily's dark hair, her unsteady steps, the way her name had become a bridge between generations. She thought of Sophie, proud and stubborn, reaching out at last not for money, but for connection. She typed her reply slowly, choosing each word with care. "Tell her I'd love to. Maybe this weekend." The answer came quickly. "She'll be thrilled. I'll help set it up." Ruth set her phone down and let herself feel the hope blooming in her chest. It was tentative, fragile, but it was real. That weekend. Ruth sat in front of her laptop, heart pounding as the screen flickered to life. Sophie appeared, looking tired but softer than Ruth remembered. In her arms was Lily, now a toddler, waving a chubby hand at the camera. "Say hi to Grandma." "Lily," Sophie coaxed, her voice gentle. Lily giggled and babbled, her eyes bright. Ruth felt tears prick at her eyes, not of regret, but of gratitude. For this moment, for the chance to begin again, however slowly. They talked about small things: the weather, Lily's favorite foods, Sophie's new job. There were awkward pauses, but also laughter. When the call ended, Sophie lingered for a moment. "Thank you, Mom," she said quietly, "for everything. I'm sorry it took me so long." Ruth smiled, her voice steady. "We're both learning." "Sophie, that's all that matters." After the call, Ruth walked down to the beach, the sand cool beneath her feet. She watched the waves roll in, erasing and redrawing the shoreline. She thought of all she had lost and all she had found: independence, self-respect, the possibility of a new kind of family, one built not on obligation, but on choice and mutual respect. As the sun climbed higher, Ruth realized she was no longer waiting for her children to come home to her. She was home, wherever she chose to be, and for the first time in a long time, she was not alone. The days after Ruth's first video call with Lily unfolded with a gentle, unfamiliar warmth. The call had been awkward at first. Sophie's voice tentative, Lily distracted by the novelty of seeing her grandmother on a screen. But as the minutes passed, something softened. Ruth found herself laughing at Lily's babbling, answering Sophie's small questions about travel, and sharing stories about her own childhood. When the call ended, Ruth sat quietly for a long time, feeling a cautious hope flicker inside her. She didn't expect miracles. Years of distance and disappointment could not be erased by a single conversation, nor by a handful of exchanged photos and messages. But the wall between them had cracked, and through that crack, light was beginning to seep in. Ruth continued her travels, but now she found herself checking her phone more often, hoping for a new message from Sophie. Sometimes it was just a picture Lily covered in spaghetti sauce, or a blurry shot of her first attempt at drawing. Other times, it was a brief update. Lily has a cold, but she's okay. Or, started my new job today. Nervous, but excited. Ruth responded with gentle encouragement, never prying, never pushing, letting Sophie set the pace. One afternoon, as Ruth wandered through a bustling market in Kyoto, her phone buzzed. It was a video call from Sophie. Heart pounding. Ruth answered. Sophie appeared on the screen, looking tired but more at ease than Ruth had seen her in years. Hi, Mom, Sophie said. Lily wanted to show you something. Lily appeared, clutching a crayon drawing. Look, Grandma, she shouted, her voice bright. Ruth smiled, tears stinging her eyes. That's beautiful, sweetheart. You're quite the artist. They talked for nearly half an hour, Lily chattering away, Sophie occasionally joining in. There was still a carefulness in Sophie's manner, but also a growing trust. When the call ended, Sophie lingered. Thank you for answering. Mom, she said quietly. I know things haven't been easy. I'm trying. I know you are, Ruth replied. So am I. After that, the calls became more frequent. Sometimes Mark would join, awkward at first, but gradually more relaxed. He told Ruth about his new job, about Emma's love for soccer, about the challenges of balancing work and family. He never mentioned money, never asked for help. Instead, he asked about Ruth's travels, her favorite places, her plans. For the first time in years, Ruth felt like a mother again, not a bank account, not a burden, but a person her children wanted to know. One evening, Diane called. You sound happier, she observed. Is it the travel or? Ruth smiled. Both, I think. I'm learning to let go of what I can't change. And I'm learning that sometimes, when you stop trying to fix everything, people find their own way back. Diane laughed. Look at you, the wise world traveler. Ruth laughed too, feeling lighter than she had in years. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, old wounds that ached when pressed. But Ruth had learned to set boundaries, to protect her own heart while still leaving it open. She knew now that reconciliation was not about returning to the past, but about building something new, something honest and fragile and real. As spring turned to summer, Ruth found herself thinking about home, not the apartment she'd left behind, but the idea of home as a place of belonging, wherever she chose to make it. She realized that, for the first time, she no longer felt lost. She was building a new kind of family, one conversation, one call, one small act of trust at a time. And as she watched the sun set over a foreign city, Ruth understood that she had finally come home to herself. Ruth's journey had taken her across continents and through the shifting landscapes of her own heart. Now, as a second spring dawned since that fateful Christmas, she found herself standing at the threshold of something new, not a country or a city, but the subtle, uncertain territory of family, forgiveness, and self respect. She had settled for a time in New Zealand, relishing the freedom of each sunrise and the anonymity of distant shores. Yet, with every gentle message from Sophie, every photo of Lily toddling through a sunlit room, Ruth felt the tug of home not as a place, but as a possibility. One morning, her phone chimed with a message from Diane. Sophie's asked if you'd consider coming back for Lily's birthday. No pressure, just think about it. Ruth stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The thought of returning to Connecticut, of facing Mark and Sophie in person, filled her with both longing and apprehension. She remembered the sting of Mark's words on the doorstep, the years of being needed only for what she could give. But she also remembered Lily's laugh, Sophie's tentative attempts at reconnection, and her own promise to live honestly, with boundaries, but not with bitterness, after days of reflection. Ruth replied, "Tell Sophie I'd like that. I'll come, but I'll stay at a hotel. Let's keep it simple." The flight home was long, but this time, Ruth traveled with a light heart. She had no gifts, no envelopes of money, only a small suitcase, a journal, and a quiet resolve. At the airport, Diane greeted her with a tight embrace. "You look wonderful," Diane said, studying her face. "Are you ready?" "I think so," Ruth replied. "Whatever happens, I'm ready to be myself." The day of Lily's birthday dawned bright and clear. Ruth arrived at Sophie's apartment, her hands trembling as she pressed the buzzer. Sophie opened the door. Lily perched on her hip, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Hi, Mom," Sophie said quietly. "Come in. The party was small, just family and a few friends." Mark was there, looking older, more subdued. Elaine greeted Ruth with a polite smile. For a moment, awkwardness hung in the air, but then Lily reached for Ruth, her small arms encircling her grandmother's neck. "Grandma," she squealed, and Ruth felt something inside her loosen. They ate cake, watched Lily tear open presents, and shared stories. There were no apologies, no dramatic confessions, just the slow, careful rebuilding of trust. Mark approached Ruth as the party wound down, his voice low. "I'm glad you came, Mom. Really?" Ruth nodded. "Me too. Mark." Sophie joined them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for giving us another chance." Ruth smiled, her voice steady. "We're all learning. That's what matters." That evening, Ruth returned to her hotel, exhausted but at peace. She knew there would be setbacks, old habits, unspoken hurts, moments when boundaries would be tested. But she also knew that she had changed, and that change had made space for something new, a family not built on obligation, but on mutual respect and choice. As she drifted to sleep, Ruth realized that coming home was not about geography. It was about courage, the courage to forgive, to be honest, and to accept love on new terms. For the first time, she felt truly at home not just in the world, but in her own heart. Ruth's return to Connecticut was not a triumphant homecoming, but a quiet, thoughtful re-entry. She stayed in her modest hotel, keeping her distance, honoring the boundaries she had fought so hard to establish. The days after Lily's birthday party passed gently calls from Diane, a few tentative texts from Sophie, and even a short message from Mark. "Glad you came. Hope you're well." These small gestures, once unthinkable, now felt like gifts. Ruth found herself walking the old neighborhood, noticing how the trees had grown, how the houses had changed. She realized she was not the same woman who had left. She was lighter, more certain of her own worth. One afternoon, Sophie called. There was no crisis, no request, just a simple invitation. Would you like to come over for dinner? Lily keeps asking about Grandma. Ruth hesitated, then agreed. That evening, she arrived at Sophie's apartment with nothing in her hands but a small bouquet of daisies. The meal was simple pasta and salad. Conversation was careful at first, but Lily's laughter soon filled the spaces between words. Ruth listened as Sophie spoke about her new job, about Daniel's work, about the challenges and joys of parenting. There was no mention of money, no hint of old grievances, just a family learning to be together again. After dinner, as Lily played at their feet, Sophie grew quiet. I'm sorry, Mom, she said softly, for everything, for the way I treated you, for not seeing you as a person, not just a mother. Ruth reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. We're both learning. Sophie, I forgive you, and I hope you can forgive me, too, for the times I gave too much or expected too little. Tears shimmered in Sophie's eyes. I already have. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm emerged. Ruth visited often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to walk with Lily in the park. Mark called more, sometimes inviting Ruth to join his family for Sunday brunch. There were still awkward moments, still old wounds that ached when pressed, but there was also laughter and honesty and a growing sense of trust. One day, as Ruth watched Lily chase butterflies in the yard, she realized that the life she had built first out of sacrifice, then out of courage, had led her here to a place where love was no longer an obligation, but a choice freely made and freely given. She thought of the years she had spent giving, the pain of being cast aside, the long journey to reclaim herself. She thought of the risks she had taken, the boundaries she had drawn, and the grace she had found in letting go. Like the biblical Ruth, she had crossed boundaries, risked her reputation, and discovered that reconciliation is a process, a series of small, brave steps toward belonging again. A6. That evening, as she walked home beneath the gentle glow of the street lights, Ruth felt a quiet gratitude. Her family was not perfect, nor was she, but they were learning slowly, honestly, together. And in that learning, she found a peace that was deeper and more lasting than any certainty she had ever known. She was home not in a place, but in herself, and in the fragile, beautiful ties that, finally, bound her family together once more. Spring in Connecticut was always slow to arrive, but this year, Ruth noticed every sign of new life, the crocuses pushing through the thawing ground, the birds returning to nest, the gentle warmth returning to the air. Each small change mirrored the quiet transformation within her family, a process of healing that was neither quick nor dramatic, but steady and real. Ruth had settled into a gentle rhythm. She met Lily and Sophie at the park most weekends, sometimes joined by Mark and his children. There were still moments of awkwardness, still silences that spoke of old wounds, but there was also laughter and the beginnings of trust. Ruth no longer felt like an outsider in her own family. She was not the center, nor was she invisible. She was simply herself, and that was enough. One afternoon, as Ruth watched Lily chase bubbles across the grass, Sophie sat beside her on the bench. For a while, they watched in companionable silence. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice quiet but steady. Mom, do you ever regret it, leaving, traveling, cutting us off? Ruth considered the question. Sometimes I regret that it had to happen the way it did. I wish I'd found the courage sooner, or that we'd all understood each other better. But I don't regret choosing myself. It's what let me be here, now, with you and Lily, without resentment. Sophie nodded, her gaze distant. I was angry for a long time, I thought you'd abandoned us, but I see now. We needed to grow up. I needed to see you as a person, not just a mother." Ruth smiled gently. "We're all still learning. That's what families do, if we let them." Later that week, Mark invited Ruth to Emma's school play. He didn't ask for money, didn't mention the past, just wanted her there, as a grandmother. Sitting in the crowded auditorium, Ruth felt a quiet pride, not just for Emma, but for herself, for surviving, for changing, for letting go of the need to be needed. That night, Ruth wrote in her journal, "Letting go is not the end of love, but the beginning of something deeper. I am no longer the mother who sacrifices everything, nor the woman who waits for gratitude that never comes. I am myself, and that is enough." As months passed, Ruth's relationship with her children continued to mend, not perfectly, but honestly. There were setbacks and misunderstandings, but also forgiveness and new beginnings. Ruth learned to say no without guilt, to offer love without condition, to accept love in return not as payment, but as a gift. On the anniversary of her husband's death, the family gathered for dinner. It was not a grand occasion, but a simple meal, full of stories and laughter. As Ruth looked around the table at Mark, at Sophie, at her grandchildren, she felt a peace she had never known before. She had let go of the old story, the one where her worth was measured by sacrifice. In its place, she had written a new one about boundaries, about respect, about the courage to choose herself and, in doing so, to find her family again. Spring gave way to summer, and Ruth stood in her small garden, hands in the earth, sunlight on her face. She knew there would always be challenges, always moments of doubt, but she also knew she had the strength to face them not alone, but with the family she had, imperfect and real. For the first time, Ruth understood letting go was not losing, but gaining the freedom to love and be loved on her own terms. Summer's warmth lingered in Connecticut as Ruth sat in her small garden, the late sunlight filtering through green leaves. She felt the peace of a life finally lived on her own terms, a peace that had been hard won, shaped by pain, distance, and the slow work of forgiveness. The family's new rhythm was gentle and real. Ruth was no longer the invisible provider, nor the outsider at the window. She was simply herself, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had learned sometimes the hardest way that love without boundaries is not love at all. That Sunday, Mark invited her for brunch. The meal was simple, the conversation easy. Mark and Elaine shared stories about their children, Emma and Noah, and Ruth listened, offering advice only when asked. There was a new humility in Mark, a quiet gratitude that needed no words. When the meal ended, he walked Ruth to her car. "Thank you for coming, Mom," he said. "I know I haven't always made it easy. I'm glad you're here." Ruth squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I'm glad too. Mark, we're both learning." A few days later, Sophie called. "Lily wants to show you her butterfly drawing," she said, laughter in her voice. Ruth listened as her granddaughter babbled about colors and wings, her small voice filling the room with joy. When the call ended, Sophie lingered. "Mom," she said quietly, "I'm proud of you for choosing yourself, for teaching me it's okay to do the same." Tears pricked Ruth's eyes. "Thank you, Sophie. That means more than you know." The seasons turned. Ruth traveled sometimes, but always returned to Connecticut, to her garden, to her family. She and Diane met for coffee, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. There were still moments of awkwardness, still echoes of old wounds, but they were softer now, outnumbered by laughter and honest conversation. On the anniversary of her husband's passing, the family gathered in Ruth's garden. They shared memories, told stories, and watched as Lily and Emma chased fireflies in the dusk. Mark raised a glass. To Mom, he said, voice steady, for everything she's given us, and for teaching us how to stand on our own. They clinked glasses, and Ruth felt the final threads of old pain loosen. She had not returned to the family as the same woman who left. She had come back whole, with boundaries and self-respect. And in doing so, she had given her children the freedom to grow as well. Bells. That night, as Ruth sat beneath the stars, she thought of the journey, the heartbreak of Christmas, the loneliness of distant shores, the courage it took to say no, and the grace it took to forgive. She understood, finally, that letting go had not meant losing her family. It had meant finding herself, and in that discovery, making space for a new kind of love, honest, chosen, and free. She closed her eyes, listening to the laughter of her grandchildren, the gentle murmur of her children's voices, and the quiet, steady beat of her own heart. The story had come full circle, not with a grand gesture, but with the quiet miracle of a family remade and a woman at peace in the center of her own life. Thank you for staying with me until the very last word. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a feeling, a quiet strength, then I hope you'll stay a while longer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need it tonight, because sometimes stories help us feel a little less alone. Until next time, take care of your heart and never forget how much it's worth.